Hello, let's talk about some recently released horror films. Oddity is first up, and it's a film that my viewers have recommended to me, and I thank you for that recommendations. Oddity comes from Damien McCarthy, the director of Caveat, which is a film I've recommended on this channel a long time ago. The thing that stood out to me the most about Caveat was how scary it was. It was obviously a small film, but still very effective, and it had some really sharp dialogue. After learning that Oddity was a ghost story, it came as no surprise to me that Mike Flanagan praised it on Letterboxd, because this is 100% cut from the same cloth as his early films like Absentia or Oculus. I'm excited for McCarthy's future because Oddity has all the things I loved about Caveat and then some. It's bigger, more polished, and perhaps most importantly, scarier than Caveat. Some of the sequences here really got under my skin, and while most of them end up being jump scares, they're still really well done jump scares. They're not the type of jump scares where I felt like I was jumping just because there was a loud noise. I jumped because there was a lot of freaky shit going on. Without saying too much, the film is set up like a murder mystery. We follow a psychic who is trying to piece together what happened to her sister, who died under mysterious circumstances. This psychic woman runs an antique store that's filled with all these haunted items, and she's able to touch these items to see who's possessed them in the past. So she has a lot more knowledge than pretty much everyone else, including the audience. There's a really good pace to this mystery. I liked how they pieced it out. It kept me engaged all throughout the film. Just like Caveat, as I mentioned before, this film doesn't have a huge budget, but they get a lot of mileage out of these haunted items and artifacts. If you've ever heard about this movie before, you've probably seen this guy, because he's been heavily featured in the marketing. This wooden statue is scarier than anything that's come out of Hollywood this year, and that's not a drag on mainstream horror. This film is just very effective in creating dread and suspense. As the film goes on, though, I do feel like we spend more time with the less interesting characters in the story, and that's really the only gripe I have with this film. I'm fine with having a story where characters weave in and out of it, but ideally you want all of those characters to feel equally as developed, and I don't think that's the case here. And just to expand on this a little bit, the film basically has two main locations: a haunted house and a mental hospital. I feel like I didn't really care all that much about the characters in the mental hospitals because they felt a bit like caricatures to me. At the end of the day, though, I still think this is one of the scariest films of the year, so I obviously still highly recommend it. It feels like a classic ghost story, and I mean that in the best way possible. You can catch it on Shudder from the 27th of September, and I think it's going to do very well on there. I'm excited for this film to get a bigger audience. Blink Twice was a really nice surprise. I didn't mean for that to rhyme, but here we are. I don't think this is as much of a slam dunk as some other critics have made it out to be. I actually have a lot of problems with the very end of this movie, but overall, I still had a great experience watching it. It's got a fantastic ensemble cast where pretty much everyone has a challenging role in one way or another. This is the first Get Out-like that's actually coming somewhat close to the greatness of that film. I think what makes it successful is that it tackles other issues than the one in Get Out, but they do it in a very similar way. If we were to bring back exploitation subgenres, I think billionaire exploitation could be a thing. There are so many ridiculous, dumb, or horrifying news stories about these people that you can pull from when making a horror movie. Now, whether that be Jeff Bezos shooting people up into space, Mark Zuckerberg not really giving a shit about misinformation on Facebook, or Elon Musk doing just about anything these days, it's safe to say that a lot of these guys are weird. Blink Twice takes some heavy inspiration from the worst of the worst. I think you know who I'm talking about.
Jeff Epstein, the New York financier.
Yes! Channing Tatum plays the Silicon Valley billionaire Slater King, who invites two waitresses to his private island after just meeting them at an event he was speaking at. We follow these two waitresses, Frida and Jess, as they begin to suspect that something dark is happening behind closed doors on the island. Zoe Kravitz directed the shit out of this movie. Her voice really comes through in a way that you would not expect from a first-time director. While the subject matter is quite dark, there's also a bit of levity and comedic moments which helps balance everything out. I was especially taken by Adria Arjona, who is ridiculously funny as this ex-reality television star who ends up on the island because she's dating one of the guys in Slater King's entourage. Every time they would talk about the show she was on, it would crack me up because it had some ridiculous name like Survivor Beach Babes, and she was on it for like 8 seasons. There's a lot of moments like that where they talk or crack jokes about things that seem inconsequential, but it pretty much always comes back around in a way you wouldn't expect. For the most part, this is a really well-written film. It's a shame the ending didn't stick the landing completely, because I think it undermines its own message in the very last scene. I'm not gonna say anything more than that. If you know, you know. Regardless, I had a really good time with Blink Twice. Before we move on, I also want to say that Blink Twice starts with a trigger warning, which doesn't necessarily spoil anything. You can figure out what is going on in the movie just from the marketing and plot description, but I still wish I didn't see it. Personally, I don't need a trigger warning, and if something shocking were to happen in the film, I would like to be surprised by it. Once again, for this movie, it really wasn't the end of the world, and I understand why it's there. I just wanted to let you guys know about it, since you're probably like me, and you want to go into films knowing as little as possible. Cuckoo is a bit of a weird one. I feel like how much you'll like this movie is depending on how much tolerance you have for quirkiness. This film does have a certain charm to it, and it's not one that I was fully immune to, but I'll just say this right away. I don't think the script for this movie is very good. There are lots of other great things about the film, though. Hunter Schafer and Dan Stevens both deliver great performances, and it looks fantastic. It's set in the German Alps, so the locations are all gorgeous, and some early sequences are genuinely trippy and unsettling. I usually never do this if I know I'm going to talk about a film for the channel, but I had to look at some other reviews of this film. Specifically, I was looking for spoiler reviews because I had to check if I was missing something about the plot of the movie. I wasn't. It's just oddly obtuse for a movie of this variety. There are character motivations here that feel completely left out of the script, and it's bizarre. It was a pretty fun ride, though. Hunter Schafer plays a teenager that moves to the Alps with her family, and the locals are pretty strange, to say the least. Dan Stevens puts on this thick German accent while really hamming it up, and he plays this hotel owner, and the two of them, him and Hunter Schafer, they have some really interesting, fun interactions, because Hunter Schafer's character begins working at the hotel's front desk. There's also some nice chase sequences that are quite stylistically pleasing, so this is very much a movie that I am split on. I think it's able to coast on its charisma alone for me, but I do wish it was a bit more coherent. This could be one of those movies that I just think is okay, and then it ends up being a cult classic, though. God knows it's happened before. Another film that's equally as wacky as Cuckoo, at least in concept, is Booger. It just came out on VOD from Dark Sky Films, who have been on my ass about copyright before, so if you're just seeing stills from the trailer, that's why. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this one because it didn't really work for me at all. It's about a woman whose best friend and roommate passes away in the beginning of the film. As she struggles with the grief, she spends most of her time caring for the cat that used to be her best friend's, or at least they used to share responsibilities for this cat. Anyways, the cat bites her, and she begins to undergo this strange transformation. It's got some body horror in it, but it's mostly a dramedy about this woman grieving. There's nothing here that's egregiously awful, but it's also pretty dull to watch. It takes itself so seriously, and that seemed like a strange choice to me. I just feel like if you're gonna do the Werecat movie with a straight face, you need something a little more than this. The film only clocks in at 78 minutes, but I don't think it's even able to sustain that runtime. I don't know, maybe I've just seen enough metaphors for grief at this point. I mean, it sucks to go through, right? You feel like a completely different person while grieving, and then at the end of it, you've probably changed permanently in some ways. Insert horror subgenre as metaphor here. I like the lead performance from Grace Glowacki, but other than that, this really wasn't my speed. I understand why it got some positive festival buzz, though, because it is competently made from a technical perspective. I could very much see this director, Mary Dotterman, going on to make something I like in the future, but those are really the only positives I came away with. Before we move on, I want to say that there are different types of negative reviews, right? Like, even though I didn't like Booger, it didn't anger me in any way. So if you think it sounds interesting to you, feel free to check it out for yourself. And if you do and love it, please feel free to tell me so in the comments. There aren't really any correct opinions about art, and that's what makes it beautiful. I'm saying all this now because I'm going to have some fun dunking on this last movie we're talking about today. But that's what this is to me, fun. And I want to keep it that way. With every video, this channel grows, and it's getting harder to moderate the comments in a timely manner. But trust me, if you're spewing hatred towards any person, any group of people, you will be shadow banned, so feel free to type your comments into the ether, I guess. The rest of us are having fun over here. With all this being said, let's talk about this last film. Carousel is a Swedish slasher film that came out in theaters over here last year. Like most recent Swedish horror films, it got terrible reviews, so I didn't see it until it popped up on Amazon Prime here in Sweden recently. I'm not sure exactly what countries this is distributed in so far, but honestly, don't sweat it. This movie is terrible, and you should not see it. So obviously, I checked this out because I love slasher films, but also because I heard a lot about this movie as it was being made. It's set at an amusement park in Gothenburg that actually exists. It's a real place called Liseberg, and it was mostly shot on location at night. This felt like such an ambitious project, especially since Sweden doesn't produce a lot of horror movies, so it was a bit shocking to see this final result. Clearly, money was put into this production. It looks super slick, the drone shots of the park at night set the atmosphere just right, and the killer's mask looks pretty cool, although very derivative of The Hills Run Red. Literally everything else about this film is mind-numbingly awful. I don't think a single character in this entire film makes any logical decisions whatsoever throughout the entire runtime. I'll get back to that. Let me tell you why this film really irked me. It's hard to fuck up a slasher movie this bad, especially when you already have a cool premise to work with. The film is set on Halloween, or more correctly, during the Halloween season, because we don't celebrate Halloween on a specific day over here. I personally always end up making it to at least one Halloween party every year, but usually those are set up during the last weekend of October. The popularity of Halloween here in Sweden has grown significantly since I was young, to the point where these big amusement parks, like Liseberg where Carousel is set, have these big events with multiple haunted houses all throughout October. I think it's a very cool idea to have a Halloween-themed horror movie that's not set in America. It could have given this film a unique angle while still appealing to audiences in the States, but none of this ever comes to fruition. The group of teens you follow are all paper-thin characters, and their dialogue made me want to rip my ears out. They're all assholes, except for one of them, Fiona, who works at the park, and she just kind of mopes around for most of the runtime until the film decides that it needs a final girl. You can write asshole teenagers in a fun way, but this just isn't it. I'd be okay with that, however, if the kills were entertaining, but they are most definitely not. CGI blood, poor staging, and cutaways ruin almost every kill. As I said before, it is shocking how bad they messed this up. They make this big point to take away everyone's cell phones at the start of the film, which is a pretty common trope in recent slasher films. It comes across as a little clunky and contrived, but I get it. You can't have these characters calling the cops right away. That's why it's so baffling that they then still do a fake out where they manage to call the police arrives, but then leave soon afterwards because they think it was a false alarm or a prank phone call. Why even bother taking away the fucking cell phones at the start of the film then? There are lots, and I mean lots, of little things like this throughout the entire film that just feel so incompetent. It is shocking to me how much money was spent on a film with a script this bad. This was also heavily marketed here in Sweden, and that couldn't have been cheap either. If you still haven't seen The Conference on Netflix, that's another Swedish slasher that probably only had a fraction of the production budget of Carousel, but it's so much better in every conceivable way. Watch the conference, stay far away from Carousel. Alright, thanks for listening to me rant about that last film a little bit. I have a lot of thoughts about Swedish cinema, Swedish horror in particular, big budget horror. They tend to work with these really awful scripts, and I just had to get that out of my system. It sucks because we actually have like a pretty healthy movie industry. The horror movies are just almost never good. But as I said, I did like the conference, so maybe go check that out. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe if you want to see more videos like this in the future, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Okay, bye.